what I set out to do with The Guardian was make a contemporary to that time Grimm fairy tale. The Grimm fairy tales are very disturbing. They're very frightening. They are not the Disney version that most people are familiar with. They are, let's face it, horror stories. But I wasn't thinking so much of a horror film as I was a Grimm fairy tale set in the contemporary world. I have read them in English translation, and I'm very fond of them, and I think they're wonderful stories, that clearly have an affinity with the works of Edgar Allan Poe and E.T.A. Hoffman, and I always wondered if it were possible to do that with a contemporary story, because obviously the Brothers Grimm were writing about a fantasy world, but it was of their time. Almost, I think everything I can remember that I've done has a contemporary setting. I'm not drawn to make films of a different period, either the past or the future. I'm much more drawn to contemporary stories, and ones that relate in some way to my own life or interests.
Where the hell have you been?
Mr. Sterling.
Where have you been?
We spent the morning at the zoo, and then we had to wait for a bus.
Did Dr. Klein see him?
No, I didn't think it was necessary.
I told you I wanted Dr. Klein to see him.
I never read the novel, The Nanny. I've glanced at it, but I've never read it. I know what it's about, basically. A script based on the novel, The Nanny, was given to me by a producer named Joe Azan, who's only recently passed away. Joe was one of my first agents when I came to California from the William Morris office, and I felt that I owed him a great deal. And he wanted to make this, and I thought the script was lame, frankly. I didn't think the script was very good at all. But I did have some time, and I thought, well, let me see if I can do something with this material and help Joe, because he really wanted me to do it. I had never worked with him since he had become a producer, but he was my agent for many years, and one of the guys who got me started in Hollywood. And he obtained for me the very last Alfred Hitchcock hour that was ever made. I directed that. Joe was very relevant to my career. I looked at the script, which I didn't care for at all. I met the young writer, Stephen Volk, and we worked on several drafts together. And for some reason, I think that the direction that I wanted to take it was not really the direction he wanted to take it. So he ultimately withdrew, and I wound up writing the final draft myself. What attracted me to the material in any way was the fact that when I was married, and we had, to a woman I'm no longer married to, we had a young baby. We had a young son. And for the first 4 or 5 months that we had this, our son, we didn't go out. We just stayed home and took care of the baby. And my wife at the time was from England, and for a good part of the time we lived in England. And then we came to the United States, where I had a home, and we decided to take a weekend and go to San Francisco, which is very near Los Angeles, where we live. And we managed, while we were in England, to find a young nanny who was with the same agency that represented Princess Diana. Before she was a princess, she had worked as a nanny. And we went to this agency, and we met a very nice young girl who had never been out of England. She was from Bath, and she'd been to London only a few times. And we had, you know, she seemed very nice, very sweet. We brought her to the United States. She was a young woman, and we decided to take a weekend off and leave our son with her. When we came back after 2 days, this young girl was very upset. She was really upset. And I asked her why, and she didn't want to tell me. And then finally, she started to dribble out some information. She said, well, she had lost her passport and all of her money. And I asked her how she did that. I said, you know, please tell me, you know, how that happened, because, you know, I'd be happy to help you, and we'll get you a new passport. But how did this happen? Somehow or other, she gave us the following story. This girl, who had been out of Bath only a few times, it turns out had a friend in Los Angeles, a girlfriend. This friend took her to a bar somewhere in Hollywood. She took the baby with her. Two guys picked them up. Two guys picked them up, and they took them back to our house and slept with them in our bed, with our baby around all the time, God knows getting how much attention or whatever. And these two guys ripped these two young girls off, took their money and their passports. And when I heard this, I hit the roof. I heard she had told me that her brother, who was, I believe he was in the Royal Navy, but in any case, he was on a ship in San Diego Harbor, which is south of Los Angeles. I put her and all of her possessions in the car and drove her to San Diego and deposited her outside her brother's ship. And this, I mean, that was obviously a horror story. It was completely unfathomable. As I say, the girl didn't know Los Angeles at all. She didn't have a car. She didn't drive. She stayed at our house, which was quite beautiful. The baby was, you know, less than months old and completely needy. And we thought we could afford, but she seemed like such a sweetheart, we thought we could afford to go away for 2 days. And that's what happened. So I related very much to the story of a nanny from hell.
The blood of the child is pure now. In death, it gives you life.
And then I've heard other stories since from friends of mine who have had other extraordinary nanny problems. Extraordinary, much more than one might expect. So it was around that time, perhaps a year or two later, that Joe Azan brought me his script of a thing called The Nanny, and I didn't like the title either. I thought it suggested more of a kind of Maggie Smith movie about, you know, an angel or something who took care of a lot of children. There are very few occasions when I've ever cast a film with big stars, Al Pacino in Cruising. But The Exorcist did not have big stars. The French Connection didn't. They became stars later. But Gene Hackman had not been in a leading role. He was a supporting actor when I cast him in French Connection. The people in The Exorcist were marvelous actors, some of the best in the world, but they weren't movie stars. One of them, Jason Miller, had never made a film. And Linda Blair, who played the 12-year-old child, she had never made a film. You know, she was 12 years old and, you know, just a very bright, precocious, innocent, and very capable young actress, it turned out. But I had gone through hundreds of actresses to find her. And often casting is a gift of God, you know. People come to you rather than you being able to find them. And that's happened to me over and over. Like with Bill Peterson in To Live and Die in L.A. He had done nothing. Then for about the last 9 years, he's been one of the major television stars of CSI in the United States. He just retired a year or so ago.
These references?
Oh, yes.
Is there anything you'd like to ask us, Miss?
Grandier.
Jenny Seagrove was known to me as a really fine British stage and film actress, which she still is, you know, and I met with her. I think she was in Los Angeles, I believe. I met with her and I found her to be very interesting, charming, and had a kind of mysterious element behind a very charming facade. And I always cast on instinctively. You know, if I think someone is right I almost never read them or do anything else. I've cast people who have never done anything, but they seemed right for the role. And if I feel they have a certain intelligence and they look right, I usually will cast them. But she was a fine actress at that time, and I think has gotten even better over the years.
You'll have eternal life through me.
Don't!
Isn't that
Just leave him
beautiful?
alone! Stop it!
There were always technical problems because we took an actual tree and we added elements to it. The actual tree had quite an imposing presence on its own, but we added certain elements to it that had to be, you know, in the realm of the supernatural. And that's always difficult. All special effects are difficult. Anything you want to do that's a special effect. But I tried to do everything in the world of special effects with this film that was in camera. You know, very few, if any, opticals. We tried to make everything work with the tree itself and elements we had added to the tree. There are a lot of problems, obviously, working with a baby or with a cat, you know. But in order to have the kind of scenes that we have in The Guardian, you have to have twins. So you have to cast two identical-looking babies, and they have to be constantly traded out. You know, you can't leave a baby on the set for more than, say, at the most, a half hour of work, and then and then the baby may fall asleep, or you know, its mood might change, whatever. So we had twins who were quite wonderful, and the way you get these people is their parents bring them in. Their parents register them to work in films, and their parents are always there. So no matter what possibly outrageous things you might see happening with a baby on film, it's all film magic, and the parents are always around to make sure everything's fine. And sometimes you have more than one set of twins. I believe we only had one set. What you've just put to me, it's regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made. And so I've reluctantly given way to the fact that it's probably a horror film. That's how people perceive it. I never did and still don't. Obviously, there are elements in it that are quite disturbing, but the film was based on an actual case. And believe me, to the parents of that child in 1949, to whom all of these incidents occurred, they were not living through a horror film. They were living through something that was actual, that was disturbing and that caused great damage to their 14-year-old son, who this story was based on. And I'm completely familiar with the facts of that case and two other cases that occurred in the United States in the 20th century. There were only three that we're aware of, three cases in the 20th century in the United States that the Catholic Church authenticated as cases of demonic possession and allowed an exorcism to be performed. This case in our film was one of them. In the so-called horror genre, I'm very fond of films like The Blair Witch Project and the two Paranormal Activity films, which were made for little money. But I think they're very effective. Over the years, the horror films that continue to engage me are Alien, Rosemary's Baby, as I say, the Paranormal Activity films, Blair Witch Project. There's a Japanese horror film that's absolutely great called Onibaba by a director called Kaneto Shindo. There's H.G. Clouseau's Diabolique, which is one of the scariest films I've ever seen. I watch it over and over again, and I'm constantly moved by it. I believe he was a great filmmaker. And Diabolique is the last, 15 minutes of Diabolique. The Clouseau version, not the American remake, is staggering. It's great. Hitchcock's Psycho is a fantastic film, except for the ending where a psychiatrist explains everything. I wish they'd lopped that off. I wish Hitchcock had lopped that off. But Hitchcock's Psycho is possibly the most disturbing film I've ever seen.